Okay, for our next app, we're going to create a cash register checkout program, and we'll do this in two parts. The first part will be the user interface that allows the user to type in item and price values to add, and those item and price values be calculated so that tax and total value for a purchase will be displayed on the form. In the next lesson, we'll take that user interface and save the information to a database and perform sales totals, sales reports. So create a new blank app, select material design, and on form 1, we will drag 2 text box widgets, and I'm going to put them side by side, and I'm going to make this text box 2 a little bit smaller, and these 2 boxes will display or allow the user to enter item descriptions and price. So for text box 1, we'll call this text box item. Text box 2, we'll give this name text box price. And then below that, let's get this back up where we want. And below this, we're going to put a repeating panel. So go back up into the toolbox, drag a repeating panel. Now this is the same repeating panel we used in the database tutorials, only in this case, we're not initially going to display any values that are drawn from the database. Instead, we're going to make a list and display a list of items that the user enters in these 2 text box widgets. And so this will be our register, our cash register display showing each of the items that's been added for purchase. Down below, we're going to add some more text boxes that will display a subtotal, a tax calculation, and a total calculation. And I'm going to drag some label widgets in so that we can more clearly identify what should be entered or what is displayed in those text box widgets. And we'll also do a little bit of design here. Take this label and we'll assign the alignment property to the right so that it's just next to the text box widgets. And let's type in the text values here, which we want displayed. So this is going to display a subtotal. And then the next text box will display a calculated tax value. And this one will display a total purchase price. We don't actually need to give that a name, but we will assign the text value to the word total. Total. Okay. And let's give each of these text box a name so we can refer to them. Since this text box will display a subtotal value, let's give that the name subtotal. And then this one is displaying. And look, when this happens, when you accidentally have a touchy mouse and move something on the display unintentionally, just go up to the undo button here and you can undo your previous changes. It should go right back to where it was. Okay, I've clicked undo a couple times, so I'm going to retype in. This is subtotal. Press and save it. So text box tax next. Best if you can use a little bit less touchy mouse. And then for the third text box, that's going to display a total sale cost. So we'll call that total. Okay, now we've got a user interface that we need. I'm going to go over to Python Anvil.com. I'm going to copy this little bit of code and we'll take a look at exactly what this does. Now, if you look at this code, you can see this is included in a method definition called text box price press enter. So that's intended to be evaluated, executed when the pressed enter event handler or the pressed enter event occurs. So we're going to go down to the event properties select press enter, and we'll just copy that code over directly from the tutorial and paste it in here. And let's get this indented the way it needs to be. And it looks like a duplicate line here. So we'll take that out. Now let's take a look at what this code does. First thing we're going to do is create a new variable called temp, T-E-M-P, and that's going to be assigned to the items property of the repeating panel that's on the user interface. And this little evaluation afterward just checks to make sure that that temp value is, if it's initially none, so if there's nothing displayed in the repeat panel, what we're going to do, if that's the case, if it's none, we're going to set the temp variable to be equal to an empty list. And otherwise, if it's not none, we'll just keep it assigned to the temp value that's already been gotten from the items property. So what now exists in the temp value is either an empty list or the list of items that's in the repeating panel, if there is already a list of items in the panel. Next, we're going to append to that temp variable a dictionary with two keys and values. The first key and value pair is the key is item, and the value assigned to that item is the text property of the text box underscore item. So the name of the item that's typed in by the user. And next, the price key is assigned to the text property of the price text box. So this is going to create a dictionary of item and price with the appropriate values typed in by the user. And next, we're going to assign that temp value back to the items property of the repeating panel. So basically, we're adding the newly entered item and price back into the repeating panel items property so that it will be displayed as a list in the repeating panel. And then we're going to perform some calculations. First, we'll create a subtotal variable, set that equal to 0, and then we'll go through a for loop, looking at each of the items in the temp variable, so each of the items in that repeating list, and we're going to add to that subtotal the price value of each item in the list. This is going to total up the price values of each of the items in the list, and then we're going to set the subtotal text box to display that subtotal value. Next, we're going to create a tax variable and set that to the subtotal value we've just created, multiply it by 0.06, which is the tax in the state that I'm currently in. And then we're going to set that tax value to be the text property of the tax text box. So we're just computing the tax and displaying it in the text box. And then next, we're going to set the text property of the total text box to subtotal plus tax, those two values we've just evaluated. And then we'll do a little cleanup at the end, just assign an empty string to the text property of the price text box, and empty string to the item text box. So clearing out what's displayed in those text boxes and then focusing the cursor back into the item text box. I can see there are going to be a couple issues here. Let's run this and I'll show you the error we get. If we add in, so for example, a hammer, and calculate, we'll say that's $19, enter that, and we're going to get an error. And it looks like we don't have that. We're not getting anything at all because currently in the design, we have not set the pressed enter event to actually run the pressed enter code. So if we click here, that'll wire this up so that it goes to this method we've defined. And it looks like it's named a little bit different. Text box price entered. Okay, so we need to bring that down here. In the code, I've named this a slightly different name, so we'll delete this former method, copy the code down in to this new method, run it again, and we're going to come up with an additional error. And just for the sake of seeing how this sort of troubleshooting is handled, we'll add another hammer, give it a price of $19, enter, and now you'll see down the bottom here in the console, you'll see a type error. Unsupported operand types for plus equals, and the operands are int and string. I can't add an int and a string variable. So let's follow the debugger here, go back to form 119, line 19. And in line 19, you're going to see we've got the value that's being added to subtotal is the price value of each item in the list. On our design screen, you can see that that value is currently a text value. So the default type for a text box is to type text. In order for us to perform a calculation on numbers, that needs to be set to number. So what that'll do is only allow a user to enter numbers, and it'll turn that number into a number value that can have math operations performed on it. So let's run this again and see what we get. Put this up all the way. We'll try and add a hammer again. And try to type that quickly, hammer, and make that $19. Press enter. And good. Now we've got a subtotal and the calculations are being performed, but you notice there is no display here. The reason why that's the case is when we look at our repeating panel, we don't have a display actually defined. What we need to do in order to make that display functional is to add another set of text boxes and bind those text boxes to each of the values in the list that we call temp. So I'm going to drag some temporary text boxes over here, and we'll align this sort of the same way that it's aligned above. And what we need to do in this case, undo that little change here. What we need to do here is set the bindings. So I'm going to go back to the design. For text box 1, we want that bound to the item property in the dictionary that holds each of the rows of information that's displayed in the repeating panel. Remember, the way that repeating panels work is each line in the display is assigned to values in each row, generally of a for loop, something that you could list through the an item in a dictionary or a list, or in a set of values that are returned from a database. In this case, we had price and item values. So for this, we're going to bind that text box 2 to the price key in the dictionary. So let's run this now, see what we get. We'll add a hammer again, make it $19. Press enter. Now, ta-da, we've got a hammer applied to the first item. Let's put some nails in. Let's say those are $10. Now you can see as we add items, that list grows. Let's do some more here. We're going to add a screwdriver. And we'll make that a cheap screwdriver at $5. Okay, and it looks like we're getting calculations that we need. Take this down. And I can see a couple errors here. So at the moment, this screwdriver hasn't been cleared from the screen, and the number 5 hasn't been cleared from the screen. So let's go down to the console and see what's going on. So in the running app, we have a couple errors. Again, we have an unsupported operand type for int and string on line 19 each time. So we need to make sure that that value is set to a let's get this open so we can look at form number 1 and check that. What's going on here is that inside the repeating panel, this text box has not been set to be a number value. So we're going to go down to the properties and also set that text box type to be a number because we're performing calculations on those also. Let's run this one more time. Hammer, $19. Good. We've got some calculations happening there. Nails, make those $10. And now the errors are gone and some calculations are being performed. So screwdriver, type that correctly. Make that inexpensive at $5. And so now we've got the correct values being displayed in the list, additions being performed correctly, the tax value is being performed correctly, and the total reflects the added values, subtotal, and tax. And you'll notice a few things here. I can make changes to the cost of each of these items because we have write back selected. As you saw in the previous examples, we can actually make changes to those values in the list. So let's add another tool. We'll call it the shovel. We'll make that $50. Press enter, and now you can see that those values have been changed. If we don't want these to be editable, what we can do is go into the design and select the widgets that are in the repeating panel, and in the binding, unselect write back, and that will keep those items from being able to be written back into the dictionary of items that's stored in the items property. You could also, if you want, disable the enabled property, and that would keep users from even being able to type into those. Let's do that so that they can't type into the widgets. We'll do the same thing for the price, and we'll come back later and add some more features to this so that items can be deleted and so forth. But for now, that's the basic interface. We're going to continue in the next lesson to tie this all into a database that stores each of the sales totals on all the items, and we'll be able to perform sales transaction totals for any report period.